Howdy, patrol members. Thanks for joining me tonight. It's a nice, chilly evening. We had plenty of rain yesterday. Sitting out here enjoying a hot cup of coffee. But I want to talk to you about something really mysterious. According to David Paulides, author of the book Missing 411, 34,000 people in North America alone vanish off the face of the earth, never to be seen again. Sounds kind of amazing. Tonight I'm going to bring you the story of one of those people, David Lang. And if you don't think that people can disappear in full view of their friends and vanish and are never seen again, well, think again. Let me tell you the story about David Lang. It was September 23rd, 1880. David Lang had just gotten back from Memphis that morning, and he had given his two children, George 8 and Sarah 11, some wooden horses and a wooden wagon so they could play in the front yard. They had just finished a relatively late lunch when David looked out the window at the front of his house and saw a buggy coming down the lane. It was the buggy of his good friend, Judge August Peck, and also in the buggy was the judge's brother-in-law. Well, David did what any neighborly person would do in those days, or even today. He went out his front door and was heading towards the gate to greet the judge's brother-in-law at the gate. But David Lang never made it to the gate. Just 20 feet from his door, in full view of the judge's brother-in-law, his wife, and two children, David vanished off the face of the earth in an instant. Momentarily astonished, everybody just stared at the spot that David Lang had disappeared into. His wife ran out the door right to the spot, looking for some sinkhole or undiscovered opening in their front yard. The judge and his brother-in-law hopped down from the wagon and ran to the spot. The children ran to the spot. They called after him. They shouted. Yet no sign of David turned up. The judge got in his buggy and ran to town, notified the sheriff, and within an hour, dozens of town people were scouring the farm and the nearby woods, looking for any trace of David Lang. They brought long metal rods from the blacksmith shop and probed deep into the earth, looking for a spot David might have fallen into. Yet, they didn't find anything. And after a day or two of looking, they had to all just accept the fact that David Lang had vanished into thin air on September 23rd, 1880. 7 months later, the two children, 8-year-old George and 11-year-old Sarah, were playing in the front yard near the spot that their father had disappeared when they thought they had heard a voice. And until their dying day, they swore that by a brown patch of grass in a circle about 10 feet across, they heard their father calling out to them from beneath the ground. A distant voice calling for help. Their father was calling to the children or anybody who would listen to try to get them to help him. They called to their father, shouting his name, shouting, "Father, Father, can you hear us?" But all they heard was this pitiful plea for help, which slowly, over a period of a few minutes, faded away and was never heard again. David's wife and family moved away from the farm. They rented the farm to Judge Peck, and he took good care of it for them. And what had happened to David? Where did he go? To some otherworldly dimension? To some realm deep beneath the earth? We'll never know. There'll never be an answer. But there you have it. David Lang vanished from the face of existence. People disappear off the face of the earth, never to be seen again. And their families are left grasping for answers. Did the person disappear because of some deep personal problem? Or was he caught up in some circumstance that was beyond his control? We'll probably never know the answers to the majority of these questions. But what happens when a whole village of people disappear? Over 150 individuals, all disappearing in the blink of an eye. That's what Joe LaBelle wanted to know. Joe LaBelle was a successful trapper in the Yukon Territory, in the Great White North up there. In the early summer of 1930, he was staying in an Inuit village called Antica. He got along well with the Inuit in that village. They always looked forward to Joe's visit because he would bring a box of sugar, and of course all the little children got to taste sugar. You know, he was a kind man, and he was well liked among the tribespeople. So once again in the summer of 1930, he outfitted himself with supplies, waved goodbye to his friends at Antica, and took off into the Great White North to trap his furs. Well, after a successful trapping season, Joe, driving his dogs and his sled laden with furs, arrived back at the village to spend a few days, get some more supplies, and head off to the nearest town to sell his furs. But when Joe arrived at the village, he was shocked by what he found. Not a single person in that village came out to greet him. As a matter of fact, there was no one left in the village. Over 150 tribespeople of the Inuit disappeared without a trace. Joe went from hut to hut, looking inside, calling out names, until he had to finally come to the conclusion that everyone was gone. Yet they left under mysterious circumstances. Food was still in cooking pots. They left all their clothing, all their possessions, including their most precious possessions, their rifles. Rifles were more than just firearms to the Inuit. They were a means of survival, protection, yet they had left them behind. He went down to the shoreline of the lake, and all their kayaks were there. What would possess an entire tribe of people to get up and walk away? Well, Mr. LaBelle was quite unnerved, so he got on his sled, cracked the whip, and mushed his dogs to the nearest outpost of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. He had a hard time convincing them of his story, but after a while, one of the Mounties said that he would accompany Joe on the 2-day trip back to the village. And when they got there, the Mountie was astonished to find out that Joe's story was true. Not only had they disappeared without a trace, leaving all their possessions, but Joe noticed, and so did the Mountie, that all the sled dogs were dead. Not killed, but dead, as if struck dead in an instant. They also discovered that 2 of the Inuit graves had been dug up. And that was the big mystery. The graves to the Inuit are sacred, yet 2 were dug up, the stones carefully stacked on each side of the grave. Animals may dig up graves, but they don't move and stack stones. The Mountie and Joe went back to the outpost, and from there they got in touch with the Mounted Patrol headquarters, and they sent a company of troops out, well, however many they could, Royal Canadian Mounted Policemen, to search the area. They also got some qualified trackers to help. And after 2 weeks of searching and tracking, they came to the conclusion that the people must have just vanished off the face of the earth. No tracks led off into the wilderness, no signs of a forced march anywhere. And forensics experts of the time, 1930 mind you, had determined that the villagers had vanished at least 2 months before Joe had returned to the village. They could tell by the type of flowers in the huts and the types of berries and other foodstuffs that were in the cooking pots undisturbed. So what happened to these poor villagers? Your guess is as good as mine. Did something frighten them so much that every man, woman, and child ran off into the wilderness to die, to not turn up anyplace else? Were they abducted by aliens? Did they fall victim to the same thing that David Lang fell victim to, except on a larger scale? Once again, we'll never know. But there you have it. Well, I'd like to thank you for joining me today on Tales and Mysteries of the Mojave Patrol. Don't forget to click like, subscribe, and the little bell above the subscribe so you can get any notifications about upcoming videos. And until next time, be careful and be aware of your surroundings.
DuMont, the world's largest organization devoted exclusively to television and electronics. Television receivers, television network, television picture tubes, telecasting equipment, electronic equipment, research. DuMont, first with the finest in television.